There's a Democrat moving forward with this resolution to impeach President Trump as well.
Yeah, and that resolution doesn't look like it has the buy-in even from his fellow Democrats. So this member of Congress has put this resolution on the floor. He's a House Democrat, Sheree Tenlander. He has put it on the floor. It will be tabled most likely in a vote tonight because Democratic leadership have signaled that they will join Republicans, and Democratic members of the House will as well, to table this motion to impeach President Trump. It doesn't have the support of House Democratic leadership, but it is a resolution that this individual member says is a long time coming. And frankly, he promises to continue to bring it up over and over and over again based on what he says are the objections he has with this administration and President Trump. But again, House Leader Hakeem Jeffries of the Democrats, as well as other House members of Democratic leadership, not in support of this effort, very much likely to fail tonight on the floor.
All right. We're going to try and keep up with you. Jay O'Brien on the Hill. A lot happening. Thank you.
Okay, this is huge. Like potentially presidency ending huge. The Supreme Court just delivered what legal experts are calling the most devastating blow to President Trump's power in modern history. And I'm not exaggerating here. This is a unanimous 9-0 ruling. That means every single justice, including the 3 Trump appointed himself, voted against him. Let that sink in for a second. His own appointees just sided against him in a decision that could literally cut his term short. We're talking about a ruling so harsh, so definitive, that it's already fueling new impeachment efforts in Congress. And the timing? Oh man, the timing on this is absolutely perfect chaos, because this isn't just about legal theory or constitutional principles. This is about Trump's actual ability to govern, his power to block investigations, his capacity to delay accountability, and the Supreme Court just took a sledgehammer to all of it. So we need to break down what actually happened here, because the implications are staggering, and most people aren't fully grasping how massive this is. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest. You can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us, be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
Gates doesn't want to be Speaker, and he has no idea who else should be Speaker. He just knows Kevin McCarthy shouldn't be Speaker. And why would anybody want to be Speaker if one guy has the power to throw you overboard? The Democrats are laughing at the Republicans now. The Republicans just dethroned their best fundraiser and throttled the impeachment inquiry. So, what's going to happen this week? Nothing. Now, that could be good. We don't know. But there's a lot going on in the country.
Here's what went down on November 21st, 2025. The Supreme Court issued a unanimous ruling rejecting Trump's broad claims of executive authority. We're talking about a decision that essentially told Trump, your power is more limited than you claim, and you need to comply with constitutional restraints immediately. No more delays, no more appeals, no more running out the clock, just compliance. And the court didn't leave any wiggle room. They slammed the door on multiple disputed executive actions. They ended unlawful National Guard deployments that Trump had been using. They ordered him to follow lower court decisions that he'd been ignoring or fighting. This wasn't a gentle reminder about presidential limits. This was a harsh institutional rebuke from the highest court in the land. And when all 9 justices agree on something this significant, you know it's serious. You know Trump really crossed the line. And the language in the ruling, that's what really stands out. The justices wrote that presidential power is more limited than you claim. That's directed specifically at Trump. That's the court telling him he's been overreaching, that he's been abusing his authority, that his interpretation of executive power is wrong. And then they ordered immediate compliance with constitutional restraints, not eventual compliance, not compliance when it's convenient. Immediate, right now, no exceptions. That's the kind of language courts use when they're fed up, when they've watched someone push boundaries for too long, and they're done being patient. The Supreme Court basically told Trump to sit down and follow the rules like everyone else. And they did it unanimously, which makes it impossible for Trump to claim this is partisan or that liberal justices are targeting him. His own appointees agreed with this. Now, legal and political experts are already saying this decision could significantly cut Trump's term or power. Think about what that means. We're not talking about minor adjustments to policy. We're talking about the possibility that Trump's presidency ends early, either through impeachment, which is already being talked about more seriously now, or through such a dramatic reduction in his powers that he becomes effectively neutered as president, unable to govern, unable to push his agenda, unable to protect himself and his allies from investigations and prosecutions. And that's exactly what's happening. Because this ruling doesn't exist in isolation, it's part of a broader pattern where Trump's legal shields are falling away one by one. The immunity ruling said he can't hide behind presidential immunity for personal acts. The Bondi scandal exposed constitutional violations at the Justice Department. The Patel situation showed the FBI director facing jail time. And now, the Supreme Court unanimously restricting his executive powers. The walls are closing in from every direction. And here's where it gets really interesting. New impeachment articles have already been introduced in the House. Representatives are citing violations exposed by Supreme Court decisions, including this one as grounds for impeachment. They're arguing that Trump has repeatedly exceeded his constitutional authority, that he's defied court orders, that he's abused his power in ways that demand removal from office. And this Supreme Court ruling gives them ammunition. It gives them a unanimous judicial decision supporting their claims that Trump has overreached. That's powerful. That's the kind of evidence that makes impeachment arguments much stronger. Because it's not just partisan Democrats saying Trump violated the Constitution. It's the Supreme Court, all 9 justices saying his claims of power are wrong and need to be reined in immediately. The political implications of this are absolutely wild. Trump's entire governing strategy has been based on pushing boundaries, testing limits, claiming maximum executive authority. He's operated like the rules don't apply to him, like he can do whatever he wants and dare anyone to stop him. And for a while that worked. He got away with a lot, but now the Supreme Court is stopping him, not suggesting he reconsider, not politely asking him to follow norms, ordering him to comply immediately or face consequences. And that changes everything. Because if Trump can't exercise the powers he claims to have, if the court is going to block his most aggressive moves, what's left? How does he govern? How does he push his agenda? How does he protect himself from the investigations and prosecutions that are ramping up? The answer is he can't. Not effectively. His presidency just got dramatically weakened, and we're watching it happen in real time. All right, let's dig into what this Supreme Court ruling actually says and why it's such a big deal. Because the specifics matter here. This isn't just some vague statement about presidential power. This is a detailed ruling addressing specific actions Trump has taken and declaring them unconstitutional or beyond his authority. One of the major issues the court addressed was Trump's deployment of National Guard troops. Apparently, Trump had been using the National Guard in ways that lower courts had already ruled were unlawful. Maybe he was deploying them without proper authorization. Maybe he was using them for purposes that exceeded his constitutional authority. The exact details vary depending on which specific deployment we're talking about. But the point is, courts had already told him to stop, and he kept doing it anyway. He kept pushing. He kept claiming he had the power to do whatever he wanted with federal forces, and the Supreme Court just shut that down completely. They said, no, you don't have that power, and you need to stop immediately. But it's not just about the National Guard. The ruling apparently addressed multiple disputed executive actions. This suggests Trump has been taking a whole range of actions that courts have found problematic. Maybe executive orders that overstepped his authority. Maybe attempts to withhold funding from programs Congress authorized. Maybe efforts to circumvent checks and balances. We don't have every specific detail laid out in the ruling, but the pattern is clear. Trump has been acting like he has unlimited executive power, and the Supreme Court just told him that's wrong. They set clear boundaries. They established that presidential power has limits, and they ordered Trump to operate within those limits going forward. No more testing boundaries, no more seeing what he can get away with, just compliance with constitutional restraints. And here's what makes this ruling so devastating for Trump's legal strategy going forward. His lawyers have been arguing in multiple cases that Trump deserves special deference, that courts should give him broad authority, that presidential power is expansive and shouldn't be questioned too much. Those arguments just got obliterated because now Trump's own lawyers have to deal with a Supreme Court ruling that explicitly says presidential power is more limited than Trump claims. That's going to come up in every case. Prosecutors are going to cite this ruling. Judges are going to reference it. And Trump's lawyers are going to struggle to explain why Trump should get special treatment or broad authority when the Supreme Court just said he doesn't have it. This ruling becomes a weapon that gets used against Trump in courtroom after courtroom. It undermines his entire legal defense strategy across multiple cases. Let's talk about the unanimity of this decision because that's really significant. We're living in a deeply polarized time. The Supreme Court often splits along ideological lines. We see 6-3 decisions all the time, with the conservative justices voting one way and the liberal justices voting another. But this was 9-0. That means Chief Justice Roberts agreed, Justice Thomas agreed, Justice Alito agreed, all 3 Trump appointees, Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Barrett, they all agreed too. This wasn't a close call where conservative justices sided with Trump out of loyalty or ideology. This was so clear-cut, so obviously beyond Trump's authority, that even his own appointees couldn't justify what he was doing. And that tells you something important about how egregious Trump's overreach has been. When you can't even get the justices you appointed to side with you, when they're willing to rule against you unanimously, you've really crossed the line. And think about what that means politically. Trump can't claim this is a witch hunt. He can't say liberal activists on the court are targeting him. He can't blame Obama appointees or Clinton appointees because his own people voted against him. The justices who owe their seats to Trump looked at what he was doing and said, no, this is wrong. This exceeds constitutional authority. That's a powerful statement that suggests deep institutional concern about Trump's behavior. And it makes it much harder for Republicans in Congress to defend him. Because if even Trump's Supreme Court appointees are ruling against him, how do you argue he's being treated unfairly? How do you claim he's the victim of partisan attacks? You can't. The unanimous nature of this ruling takes away that defense. Now let's talk about the impeachment angle, because that's where this gets really explosive. Impeachment has been discussed throughout Trump's second term. Democrats have been calling for it. Some Republicans have been worried about it, but it hasn't had enough momentum to actually happen. Until now, because this Supreme Court ruling changes the calculation. It provides concrete evidence that Trump has exceeded his constitutional authority. It gives impeachment proponents a strong factual and legal basis for their arguments. And according to reports, new articles of impeachment have already been introduced in the House. Representatives are specifically citing violations exposed by Supreme Court decisions, including this unanimous ruling, as grounds for removal. They're saying Trump has repeatedly defied courts, exceeded his powers, and violated his oath to faithfully execute the laws, and now they have the Supreme Court backing them up. Here's how impeachment works, just so everyone's on the same page. The House of Representatives votes on articles of impeachment. If a majority votes yes, the president is impeached. Then the case goes to the Senate for trial. If 2/3 of senators vote to convict, the president is removed from office. It's a high bar. It requires significant bipartisan support in the Senate, and historically, it's been very hard to remove a president through impeachment, but this Supreme Court ruling makes it more likely, because it gives cover to Republicans who might be considering voting for impeachment or conviction. They can say they're not acting on partisan grounds. They're simply enforcing what the Supreme Court has unanimously declared, that Trump exceeded his constitutional authority. That's a much easier position to defend back home to constituents. And there's already evidence that some Republicans are getting nervous about Trump. We've seen cracks in GOP support throughout his second term. Members who are willing to criticize him privately, even if they won't do it publicly. Senators who are concerned about his behavior, but afraid of primary challenges if they break with him. This Supreme Court ruling could be the thing that gives those people permission to act, because it's not just Democrats saying Trump did wrong. It's the entire Supreme Court. That's institutional validation for concerns about Trump's conduct. And it makes it harder for Trump to punish Republicans who vote against him, because they can point to this ruling and say they were just following what the court said. Let's also talk about the practical effects of this ruling on Trump's ability to govern, because that's huge. Trump's whole approach has been about asserting maximum power, about pushing boundaries, about acting first and dealing with legal challenges later. He'd issue executive orders that might be questionable, deploy federal forces in ways that might exceed his authority, take actions that would inevitably get challenged in court. But by the time courts ruled, he'd already accomplished whatever he wanted to accomplish. That strategy doesn't work anymore, because the Supreme Court just said immediate compliance. That means Trump can't drag things out. He can't keep doing something while appealing unfavorable lower court decisions. He has to stop immediately when a court tells him he's exceeded his authority. And that fundamentally changes how he can govern. It makes him much more cautious, much more limited, much less able to push his aggressive agenda. And think about what this means for all the investigations into Trump and his administration. He's been using executive privilege claims, presidential immunity arguments, and other legal tactics to block or slow down investigations. But this Supreme Court ruling undermines those tactics, because it establishes that Trump's view of presidential power is wrong, that his claims of broad authority don't hold up, that he needs to comply with legal processes and constitutional restraints. So investigators, prosecutors, congressional committees, they all just got more power to compel testimony, obtain documents, and hold people accountable, because Trump's ability to resist has been dramatically weakened by this ruling. He can't claim executive privilege as broadly. He can't assert immunity as effectively. The Supreme Court just took away his best defenses. There's also a timing element here that's really important. We're heading into 2026. Midterm elections are coming, and this ruling drops right in the middle of campaign season. That's terrible timing for Trump and Republicans, because now every Republican candidate is going to get asked about this. Do you support a president who the Supreme Court unanimously said exceeded his constitutional authority? Do you think Trump should be impeached based on these violations? Do you defend his actions even when his own Supreme Court appointees ruled against him? Those are nightmare questions for candidates in competitive races, and Democrats are absolutely going to hammer these points in every speech, every debate, every ad. This Supreme Court ruling just became the centerpiece of the 2026 Democratic campaign strategy. One more thing that's worth noting, this ruling sets precedent, not just for Trump, but for all future presidents. The court is establishing clear boundaries on executive power. They're saying presidents can't just claim unlimited authority. They're reinforcing the system of checks and balances. They're making sure the judicial branch maintains its ability to constrain executive overreach. That's important for the long-term health of our democracy. But in the short term, it's devastating for Trump because he's governed on the assumption that he could push limits and get away with it. And the court just said, no, you can't. And that changes everything about his presidency and his legal exposure going forward. Okay, so let's break down what actually happens next and what the real-world consequences of this Supreme Court ruling are going to be. First and most immediate, Trump has to comply with the court's orders. He has to stop the National Guard deployments that were ruled unlawful. He has to follow lower court decisions that he's been fighting or ignoring. And he has to do it now, not after appeals, not after trying to find loopholes. Now, that's a huge change from how Trump has operated. He's been able to delay and obstruct for so long that compliance feels almost foreign. But the Supreme Court left him no choice. And if he tries to defy this ruling, he's going to face serious consequences because you can't just ignore the Supreme Court. That's contempt. That's a constitutional crisis that could accelerate impeachment efforts even faster. Second, the impeachment push is going to intensify dramatically. Representatives who introduce new articles of impeachment are going to use this ruling as their primary evidence. They're going to argue that the Supreme Court has confirmed Trump exceeded his authority, that he violated constitutional restraints, that he needs to be removed from office to protect the integrity of our system. And here's the thing, that argument is going to resonate beyond just progressive Democrats because you have a unanimous Supreme Court decision backing up the claim that Trump overreached that gives moderate Democrats and even some Republicans cover to support impeachment. They can say they're not being partisan, they're just following what the court determined. That's a much stronger position than previous impeachment efforts have had. Now, will impeachment actually succeed? That's the big question. Getting the House to vote for impeachment, that's probably doable. If Democrats stay united and pick up a few Republicans, the House only needs a simple majority, but conviction in the Senate requires 2/3 of senators. That's 67 votes. That's a much higher bar, and it will require a significant number of Republicans to vote to remove Trump. Is that realistic? Before this Supreme Court ruling, I would have said no way, but now it's at least possible because this ruling changes the political dynamics. It gives Republicans who are already concerned about Trump a reason to act, a justification they can take back to their constituents. We're not going to see 20 or 30 Republican senators flip overnight, but if even 10 or 15 are willing to consider it, suddenly the math starts looking different. Third, Trump's ability to execute his agenda is severely compromised. Everything he wants to do now has to be examined through the lens of this Supreme Court ruling. Does this action exceed constitutional authority? Will courts strike it down? Can I actually enforce this? Or will judges block it immediately? That kind of uncertainty makes it really hard to govern effectively. It makes it hard to take bold action. It makes it hard to push controversial policies because Trump now knows the Supreme Court isn't going to give him deference. They're going to scrutinize his actions. They're going to enforce constitutional limits, and they'll do it unanimously if they think he's going too far. That's a massive constraint on presidential power. And think about Trump's staff and advisors. They're probably in panic mode right now because they've been enabling Trump's aggressive approach. They've been telling him he can do things that are legally questionable. They've been pushing the boundaries right along with him. But now the Supreme Court has drawn a clear line, and anyone who helps Trump cross that line could face their own legal jeopardy. We've already seen Bondi admit to constitutional violations. We've seen Patel facing jail time for contempt. The message to Trump's inner circle is clear. If you help him break the law, you're going to face consequences, and that's going to make people more cautious, more likely to push back when Trump wants to do something legally risky, more willing to say no or resign rather than participate in conduct that could land them in prison. Fourth, what this does to Trump's legal defense strategy in his various criminal and civil cases. He's been relying heavily on arguments about presidential power, executive privilege, immunity. Those arguments just got much weaker because now there's a Supreme Court ruling establishing that Trump's view of presidential power is wrong, that his claims of broad authority don't hold up. Prosecutors in every case against Trump are going to cite this ruling. They're going to argue that Trump's legal theories have been rejected by the highest court in the land, and judges are going to be more skeptical of Trump's defenses as a result. This ruling doesn't directly decide Trump's criminal cases, but it creates a hostile legal environment for his arguments. It makes it harder for his lawyers to claim he deserves special treatment or protection. Fifth, the political fallout in the 2026 midterms is going to be massive. Republicans are going to be forced to defend a president who was unanimously rebuked by the Supreme Court, who exceeded his constitutional authority so egregiously that even his own appointees ruled against him. That's not an easy position, and Democrats are going to exploit it mercilessly. Every campaign ad is going to mention this ruling. Every debate is going to feature questions about it. Every speech is going to reference Trump's constitutional violations, and Republicans won't have good answers. They can't claim the court is biased. They can't say it's a partisan witch hunt. They're just going to have to own it or distance themselves from Trump. Either way, they lose votes. And Trump himself is probably furious about this. He doesn't take rejection well. He doesn't like being told no and having the Supreme Court, including justices he appointed, unanimously rule against him. That's got to be eating him alive. We're probably going to see him lash out, attack the court, question their legitimacy, try to delegitimize the ruling, but that's only going to make things worse. Because attacking the Supreme Court when they rule unanimously against you makes you look unhinged. It makes you look like you don't respect the rule of law. It gives impeachment advocates more ammunition. Trump's best move would be to quietly comply and move on. But Trump never makes his best move. He always escalates. He always attacks. And that's going to accelerate his downfall. Sixth, what about Trump's relationship with his Supreme Court appointees? Because that's got to be strained now. Trump appointed Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Barrett expecting loyalty, expecting they rule in his favor when it mattered, and they just voted unanimously against him. Trump views everything through the lens of personal loyalty. He's going to see this as betrayal. He's going to be angry at these justices, and we might see him publicly criticize them, question whether they were the right choices. That would be unprecedented. Presidents don't usually attack Supreme Court justices. They appoint it, but Trump isn't bound by normal presidential behavior. And if he does attack them, it's only going to further damage his standing and make Republicans more uncomfortable defending him. Seventh, the long-term implications for executive power and presidential accountability. This ruling is going to be studied for decades. It's going to be cited in constitutional law classes. It's going to shape how future presidents think about the limits of their authority. And that's probably good for democracy because we need clear boundaries. We need presidents to know they can't just claim unlimited power. We need the Supreme Court to be willing to push back when presidents overreach. This ruling establishes all of that. But in the immediate term, it's devastating for Trump because he's the test case. He's the president who pushed too far and got smacked down. And that makes him weaker, more vulnerable, and more likely to face accountability through impeachment or criminal prosecution. Eighth, what's the timeline on all of this? How fast do things move from here? Well, impeachment could happen relatively quickly if Democrats decide to push it. Articles have already been introduced. They could hold hearings, call witnesses, and have a House vote within weeks or months. The Senate trial would take longer, probably a couple months from start to finish. So we could potentially see an impeachment vote in the House by spring 2026 and a Senate trial by summer. That would be right in the middle of campaign season. Maximum political chaos, maximum media attention, and maximum pressure on Republican senators to decide whether they're going to stand with Trump or stand with the Constitution. So where does this leave us? With the president, whose power has been dramatically curtailed by a unanimous Supreme Court ruling, with impeachment efforts that now have strong legal backing, with a governing agenda that's been crippled by constitutional constraints, with the 2026 election cycle that's going to be dominated by questions about Trump's fitness for office, with the legal landscape that's increasingly hostile to Trump's defense strategies, with the political party that's fracturing over how to handle a president who even his own appointees ruled against. This is a pivotal moment. This could be the beginning of the end of Trump's presidency, or at least the end of his ability to govern effectively. Because once the Supreme Court unanimously says you've exceeded your authority, once impeachment articles are filed based on that ruling, once your own party starts questioning whether you're worth defending, that's when presidencies start to crumble. And we're watching it happen in real time. Stay tuned, because the next few months are going to be absolutely wild.